A cell is a sophisticated arrangement of compartments, each of which performs a variety of biochemical processes essential to life. Yet, a cell rarely performs as an independent unit in the organism. Instead, cells typically collaborate as a component of tissues. Factors such as the composition of the extracellular material that surrounds the cells and the connections between the cells that constitute the tissue determine the structure and qualities of a given tissue. Bone, fat, and blood provide as examples of the spectrum of tissue firmness, which can be hard, semi-solid, or even liquid. Furthermore, tissues differ greatly in terms of the kind of cells present, how the cells are organized, and the type of extracellular material. The general characteristics of epithelial tissue will be explained in this session, along with the location, makeup, and purpose of each type of epithelial tissue. What is tissue? A tissue is a collection of cells that often share an embryonic origin and work as a unit to perform specific tasks. Bodily tissues are categorized into four fundamental categories based on their form and function: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. The layer or layers of cells that cover the body's surfaces or line the cavities that open onto it are referred to as epithelium. In general, epithelia act as selective barriers that allow or prevent substances from passing through the surfaces they cover. They may also shield underlying tissues from dehydration, chemical or mechanical injury, manufacture and secrete materials into the areas they line, and operate as sensory surfaces. Surface epithelium and glandular epithelium are two categories into which epithelial tissue can be divided. Surface epithelium surfaces frequently have different structural characteristics and have different purposes. An epithelial cell's apical surface is directed towards the body surface, a body cavity, an internal organ's lumen, or a tubular duct that collects cell secretions. Cilia and microvilli may be present on the apical surfaces. Tight junctions, adherent junctions, desmosomes, and/or gap junctions may be present on an epithelial cell's lateral surfaces, which are exposed to the neighboring cells on each side. An epithelial cell's basal surface is located in opposition to its apical surface. The basal surfaces of the epithelial cells in the lowest layer cling to extracellular components like the basement membrane. The deepest layer of epithelial cells include hemidesmosomes that serve as an anchor for the epithelium to the basement membrane. The most superficial layer of cells in epithelia with many layers is referred to as the apical layer, while the deepest layer of cells is referred to as the basal layer. The basal lamina and reticular lamina, two layers that typically make up the basement membrane, are a thin extracellular layer. Although epithelial tissue has its own nerve supply, it is avascular and depends on the blood vessels of the underlying connective tissue for the delivery of nutrients and the removal of wastes. Diffusion is the process through which chemicals are transferred from an epithelial tissue to a connective tissue. The arrangement of cells into layers and cell shapes are used to further categorize different types of surface epithelium. 1. Layered cell arrangement. Depending on their purpose, the cells are grouped in one or more layers. A simple epithelium is a single layer of cells that performs tasks such as diffusion, osmosis, filtration, secretion, and absorption. B. Pseudostratified epithelium, pseudo meaning false, appears to have numerous layers of cells because cell nuclei are located at different levels and not all cells reach the apical surface, yet it is a simple epithelium because all of its cells sit on the basement membrane. If a cell does reach the apical surface, it may have cilia or goblet cells, which release mucus. C. In areas with significant wear and tear, stratified epithelium from the Latin strata, which means layers made up of two or more layers of cells that serve as a barrier for underlying tissues. 2. Cell forms. The morphology of epithelial cells varies according on their purpose. A. Because squamous cells are thin, chemicals can go through them quickly. B. Cube or hexagon-shaped cuboidal cells are equally tall and wide. They can function in secretion or absorption and have microvilli on their apical surface. C. Columnar cells, which shield underlying tissues, are significantly higher than they are wide. They frequently have cilia or microvilli on their apical surfaces, which are specialized for secretion and absorption. D. Transitional cells change shape as urinary system organs like the bladder enlarge and then contract to a smaller size, going from being squamous to cuboidal and back again. As viewed from the apical surface, simple squamous epithelium is a single layer of flat cells that resembles a tile floor, centrally positioned nucleus that is flattened and oval or spherical in shape. This tissue most typically lines the circulatory and lymphatic systems as endothelium and forms the epithelial layer of serous membranes of the abdominal and thoracic cavities as mesothelium, which is found in the air sacs of the lungs, the glomerular capsule of the kidneys, the inner surface of the cornea, the inner surface of the tympanic membrane, or the eardrum. This tissue can be found in serous membranes at the sites of filtration, diffusion, and secretion. Areas of the body that are prone to mechanical stress do not contain this sort of tissue. Single cuboidal epithelium is composed of a single layer of cube-shaped cells with a circular nucleus in the middle. When tissue is cut into sections and examined from the side, cuboidal cell form is evident. Little tubes could not be formed by strictly cuboidal cells. These cuboidal cells are more pie-shaped, but are nonetheless almost as tall as they are wide at the base. This tissue lines the anterior surface of the lens capsule of the eye, lines the surface of the ovary, lines the smaller ducts of several glands, including the thyroid gland, and lines the posterior aspect of the retina of the eye. It also lines the kidney tubules and produces the pigmented epithelium. The functions of the simple cuboidal epithelial tissue are secretion and absorption. Non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium consists of a single layer of non-ciliated column-like cells with oval nuclei close to the base of the cells, contains 1. Columnar epithelial cells with microvilli at the apical surface, and 2. Goblet cells. The plasma membrane's surface area is increased by microvilli finger-like cytoplasmic projections, enhancing the cell's rate of absorption. Goblet cells are altered columnar epithelial cells that release mucus at their apical surfaces. Mucus is a thinly gummy fluid. Mucus builds up in the upper part of the cell before to release, causing it to swell and giving the cell as a whole the appearance of a goblet or wine glass. This tissue lines the gallbladder, several glandular ducts, and the digestive tract. This tissue's primary functions are secretion and absorption. Larger columnar cells have more organelles and can secrete and absorb more fluid than cuboidal cells because of this. The majority of the urinary tract, the respiratory tract, the genital tract, and the digestive tract all have linings made of mucus that are secreted. This mucus also protects the stomach lining from the stomach's acidic gastric liquid. Next is ciliated simple columnar epithelium. A single layer of ciliated column-like cells with oval nuclei close to the base of the cells makes up this epithelial tissue. Usually, goblet cells are distributed everywhere. It lines a few of the bronchioles in the respiratory system, the uterus, a few paranasal sinuses, the spinal cord's central canal, and the ventricles of the brain. To move mucus and foreign objects towards the throat, where they can be coughed up and swallowed or spit out, the cilia in the respiratory tract beat in unison. Mucus and cilia move more quickly when you cough and sneeze. Cilia also aid in the passage of immature oocytes from the ovaries into the uterus, via the uterine tubes. Non-ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium appears to have several layers because the nuclei of the cells are at various levels. Even though all the cells are attached to the basement membrane in a single layer, some cells do not extend to the apical surface. This structure gives the appearance of a multilayered tissue when viewed from the side, hence the name pseudostratified epithelium. Both lacks goblet cells and has cells without cilia. It lines the male urethra's portions, the major ducts of many glands, and the epididymis. Absorption and secretion are the roles. Ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium appears to have several layers because cell nuclei are at various levels. All cells are attached to basement membrane in a single layer, but some cells do not extend to apical surface. When viewed from side, these features give false impression of a multi-layered tissue. Contains cells that extend to surface and secrete mucus or bear cilia. It lines airways of most of upper respiratory tract. The function is secrete mucus that traps foreign particles, and cilia sweep away mucus for elimination from body. Here are the pictures of simple surface epithelium tissues. Now led to the other type of epithelium tissue, stratified squamous epithelium. It has two or more layers of cells, with squamous cells at the apical layer and numerous layers below it, with cells ranging from cuboidal to columnar in the deeper levels. Daughter cells originating from cell divisions push upward towards the apical layer as basal cells divide. They become dry and less metabolically active as they travel towards the surface and away from the underlying connective tissue's blood supply. As the amount of cytoplasm decreases, cells turn into tough, hard structures that eventually die. Tough proteins prevail. Once dead cells lose cell connections, they are sloughed off at the apical layer, but they are constantly replaced as new cells emerge from basal cells. The apical layer of cells and several layers below the apical layer of the keratinized stratified squamous epithelium form a strong layer of keratin. Skin and underlying tissues can benefit from the stiff, fibrous intracellular protein keratin's ability to protect them from heat, bacteria, and chemicals. As cells move away from nutritive blood supply and organelles perish, the relative amount of keratin increases in the cells. Surface cells do not die in non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, instead, they are shed before they die. This epithelium is continuously moistened by mucus from salivary and mucous glands. Its apical layer and several layers deep do not contain significant levels of keratin. Non-keratinized variety lines wet surfaces, lining of mouth, esophagus, portion of epiglottis, section of throat and vagina, and covers tongue. Keratinized variety forms superficial layer of skin. It provides defense against abrasion, water loss, UV radiation, and invading foreigners. The first line of defense against microorganisms is formed by both types. The cells in the apical layer of stratified cuboidal epithelium are cube-shaped, and it is a rather uncommon form. The male urethra's esophageal glands and adult sweat gland ducts are where you can find it. It provides protection by limiting secretion and absorption. The shorter, irregularly shaped cells that make up the basal layers of stratified columnar epithelium are typically present. Columnar cells are only found at the apical layer, which is uncommon. It borders a portion of the urethra, several glands, large excretory ducts, including the esophageal glands, tiny sections of the anal mucous membrane, and a portion of the conjunctiva of the eye. This tissue serves as a barrier and a secretory organ. The urinary system's urothelium is a special type of tissue with a variety of appearances. In a relaxed or unstretched form, it resembles stratified cuboidal epithelium, except that the apical layer cells are larger and rounder. Cells flatten out as tissue is stretched, providing the appearance of stratified squamous epithelium. Its many layers and flexibility make it perfect for lining hollow structures like the urinary bladder that are prone to internal expansion. It lines the urethra, ureters, and urine bladder. It enables urinary organs to store various quantities of fluid without rupturing while stretching and maintaining a protective covering. Secretion is carried out by glandular cells, which are frequently found in clusters deep in the surface epithelium and serve the glandular epithelium's purpose of secretion. In order to discharge substances into ducts, tubes, onto a surface, or ultimately into the circulation in the absence of ducts, a gland is made up of epithelium. There are two types of glands in the body: endocrine and exocrine. Hormonal secretions from endocrine glands diffuse into the bloodstream after entering the interstitial fluid without passing via a duct. Because endocrine secretions are transported by the bloodstream throughout the body, they have wide-ranging effects. Exocrine glands exude their contents into ducts that discharge onto an epithelium that covers or lines a surface, such as the surface of the skin or the lumen of a hollow organ. Exocrine gland secretions have a restricted range of actions, and some of them would be dangerous if ingested. The pancreas, ovaries, and testicles are examples of mixed glands in the body that contain both endocrine and exocrine tissue. Hormones released by an endocrine gland diffuse into interstitial fluid before entering the bloodstream. Examples include the pineal and thyroid glands in the brain, the pituitary gland at the base of the brain, the adrenal glands above the kidneys, the pancreas next to the stomach, the ovaries in the pelvic cavity, the testicles in the scrotum, and the thymus in the thoracic cavity. To maintain homeostasis, hormones control a variety of physiological and metabolic processes. The secretory substances produced by exocrine glands are discharged into ducts that end up on an epithelium that covers or lines a surface, such as the skin's surface or the lumen of a hollow organ. It can be present in the sweat, oil, and earwax glands of the skin, as well as in the pancreas and digestive glands like the salivary glands. It creates things like oil, earwax, saliva, or digestive enzymes to assist lower body temperature. Exocrine glands can be single or multicellular in nature. Unicellular glands are single-celled glands, as the name suggests. Important unicellular exocrine glands called goblet cells produce mucus directly onto a lining epithelium's apical surface. A characteristic microscopic structure or macroscopic organ is formed by a number of cells that make up the majority of exocrine glands, which are multicellular glands. Salivary, sebaceous, and sudoriferous glands are some examples. Two factors are used to classify multicellular glands: the form of the gland's secretory regions and the branching or unbranching of its ducts. It is a simple gland if the gland's duct does not branch. A complex gland has branching ducts. Tubular glands are those with tubular secretory components. Acinar glands, also known as alveolar glands, are those with rounded secretory portions. The secretory components of tubuloacinar glands are both tubular and more rounded. There are several different secretion mechanisms. In the event that the secretions are initially contained within membrane-bound vesicles, these are transported to the cell surface and released there. The most frequent secretory method, merocrine secretion, involves the fusion of vesicle membranes with plasma membranes to release their contents to the outside. Marker proteins on the cytoplasmic side of the plasma membrane are recognized by specialized transmembrane molecules in the secretory vesicle wall and bound to. The two membranes fuse as a result, releasing the contents of the vesicle, and this starts interactions with other proteins. Although the trigger for secretion differs depending on the type of cell, it frequently seems to entail an increase in intracellular calcium. Eccrine glands were originally thought to include simple sweat glands on the skin, which actively transfer ions and water from plasma as an exudate. They have been categorized as merocrine glands, since it is now known that they can produce and secrete trace amounts of protein through a merocrine mechanism. A portion of the apical cytoplasm of apocrine glands gets pinched off along with the secretions it contains. These secretions are then retained in the cell as membrane-free droplets. The process by which mammary gland cells secrete milk fat is the best understood illustration of this. During this process, a little portion of cytoplasm gets integrated into the lipid globule that is linked to the plasma membrane as it is expelled from the cell. Specialized apocrine sweat glands in the axillary and anogenital regions of the body secrete larger amounts of cytoplasm. Certain tissues produce a combination of various secretions. For instance, the casein and milk fat produced by the mammary gland cells are merocrine and apocrine secretions, respectively. In the holocrine glands, for instance, in sebaceous glands of the skin, the cells first fill with secretory substances, in this case, lipid droplets or sebum, and then the entire cell splits open to release the collected mass of secretion into the nearby duct or, more frequently, the hair follicle.